Today we are talking about Moya Brennan's funeral announcement, and in this video we'll go through everything that has been confirmed, everything that has quietly surfaced around her final days, and the details that deserve more attention than they're getting. Because this isn't just a news story about a singer passing away. This is about the end of a voice that was called, by Bono himself, one of the greatest the human ear has ever experienced. And what happened in those final hours in a small coastal corner of northwest Donegal is a story worth telling properly. So let's start from the beginning. Moya Brennan, born Mare Nye Breanain, the eldest of 9 children in the Brennan family of Gweedore, County Donegal, a family so deeply rooted in Irish music that the tradition practically ran through the water there. She was the lead voice of Clannad. That name alone carries enormous weight. Formed in the early 1970s alongside her brothers Paul and Ciarán and their twin uncles Noel and Padraig Duggan, Clannad began performing in the family pub Leo's Tavern before any of them could have imagined what was coming. What came was a sound unlike anything Ireland had produced before. Haunting, ancient, modern, Celtic music filtered through something almost otherworldly, and at the center of it was Moya's voice, a voice that didn't perform emotion so much as simply carry it as naturally as wind moves through grass. The band sold more than 10 million albums. They won a Grammy. They won a BAFTA. Their 1982 single theme from Harry's Game landed them on top of the Pops, an Irish-language song on mainstream British television which at the time was nearly unthinkable. And their 1986 collaboration with Bono in A Lifetime became one of the defining songs of that entire era. But Moya was also a solo artist, more than 30 albums across her career, collaborations with Hans Zimmer, the global hit Saltwater with Chicane, a performance before Pope John Paul II and 2.7 million young people at the World Youth Prayer Vigil in Rome, a Lifetime Achievement Award from Arte in 2019. And yet, through all of it, she never left Donegal. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. She remained a presence at Teach Leo, the family pub, hosting open mic nights with new and established artists long after she had every reason to simply rest on an extraordinary legacy. That is the woman the world lost on Monday night, April 13, 2026. The news broke quietly at first, the way it often does with people who never chased headlines. Moya Brennan died peacefully at her home in Upper Door, Gweedore, the same community where she was born, the same landscape that shaped every note she ever sang. She was 73. The cause was described as a short illness, though no specific details were made public by the family. She was surrounded by family when she passed. That detail was included in the official statement, and it carries weight. Because for someone who spent her career in front of audiences across the world, her final moments were in exactly the place she always returned to, home in Donegal with the people she loved most. The statement from her brothers Paul and Ciarán on Clannad's social media was brief and raw. They wrote that they were completely heartbroken at the passing of their dearest sister Mare. They noted that she had crossed over at home in Donegal surrounded by family, and that she had now joined Padraig and Noel across the Vale, referencing 2 members of Clannad who predeceased her, twin uncles Noel and Padraig Duggan. And then the line that quietly spread everywhere: her voice was the signature sound of Clannad and will live on forever. That's not a press release, that's 2 brothers trying to find words for something language isn't built to carry. And this is where things take a different turn. Because Moya was predeceased not only by her father Leo Brennan, but by her brother Leon Brennan and both of those twin uncles who helped build Clannad. By the time of her death, she had already outlived several of the people who were there at the very beginning, those early nights at Leo's Tavern, when the whole thing was still just a family playing music together, because music was simply what they did. The funeral arrangements were announced quickly and with a specificity that felt very much like Donegal: practical, grounded, rooted in tradition. Moya's remains were to repose at her home in Upper Door on Wednesday, April 15 and Thursday, April 16, from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. each day, with prayers nightly at 8 o'clock. The house was to be private after prayers and on the morning of the funeral. The funeral mass is confirmed for Friday, April 17, 2026 at 2 p.m. in St. Patrick's Church, Meenaweel, Crowley in the Gaeltacht heartland of Donegal. Interment to follow at Magheragalan Cemetery in Gweedore. For those who cannot travel to the northwest of Ireland, the Mass will be streamed live through Kieran Rorty Funeral Director's Facebook page and the church webcam via MCN Media. In lieu of flowers, the family is asking for donations to Donegal Cancer Flights and Services. That last detail, the chosen charity, is a quiet and revealing one. Not a music foundation, not an arts organization. Donegal Cancer Flights and Services, a local charity that helps patients in rural Donegal access cancer care that would otherwise require long, difficult travel. It speaks directly to something about who Moya Brennan was beyond the stage, rooted in her community, concerned with the real and practical struggles of the people around her. Something about this doesn't feel like a celebrity funeral. It feels like Donegal saying goodbye to one of their own. The tributes began arriving almost immediately, and the names attached to them trace the full scope of what Moya Brennan actually meant. Bono, who had already gone on record saying she possessed one of the greatest voices the human ear has ever experienced, released a statement saying she walked through this world like an angel and now she's back with her own kind. He added simply, "We love you, Moya." That line was written by someone who meant it. Taoiseach Micheál Martin called her an iconic Irish voice, noting that she and Clannad brought Irish folk music to the international stage. Taoiseach Simon Harris described her as a musical icon with a voice of extraordinary beauty. President Catherine Connolly, speaking from a political office rather than a cultural one, said Moya was an iconic figure in Irish music who had brought Irish music and culture to listeners all over the world. And then she added something that went slightly further than the standard tribute. She noted that Moya had shown great strength in speaking of her own personal experiences, and had served as an inspiration to so many people through her work on worthy causes. That line references something real. Moya Brennan was open about personal struggles, including a serious health crisis earlier in her life that she spoke about publicly. She was not a performer who maintained a polished exterior at all costs. She was candid, and that candor made her a different kind of figure for many people who found her music. What many people didn't notice is how the tributes from within the Irish music world carried a particular texture of grief. Not the grief of losing a distant icon, the grief of losing someone who was still present, still showing up, still part of the living conversation of Irish music. Mariadne M. Hayeneg, the acclaimed Donegal fiddler, said Moya paved the way for people like herself and called her a hero growing up. Eleanor McEvoy simply wrote, "The music world has lost a legend today." And her sister Enia, Ethni Breanain, who left Clannad in the mid-1980s to pursue a solo career and became one of the best-selling music artists in history, was named in the death notice as a surviving family member. The relationship between these two sisters, both shaped by the same Donegal landscape, both carrying that sound into the world in their own ways, is one of the more quietly profound threads in Irish music history. There is something worth sitting with in the final chapter of Clannad's story. The band completed their 50th anniversary in a lifetime farewell tour in October 2024, closing with a final show at London's Royal Albert Hall, less than 6 months before Moya's death. She had played the final note of Clannad's 50-year chapter on a stage worthy of everything they built, and then she came home to Donegal. The farewell tour really was a farewell. Magheragalan Cemetery in Gweedore, where she will be buried, is the kind of place where the Atlantic wind never fully quiets. It sits at the edge of a landscape that has been inspiring Irish language music and poetry for centuries. It is where Moya Brennan will rest, not far from where she was born, not far from where she first sang. There is a version of Moya Brennan's story that looks like this. A girl from a music family in a remote corner of northwest Ireland who became the voice of a band that sold tens of millions of records, collaborated with rock legends, scored films with Hans Zimmer, and sang before millions. But the version her community knows is simpler. A woman who always came home, who ran open mic nights at the family pub long after the stadium tour were done, who asked that donations in her memory go to a local cancer charity, who died at home, surrounded by family. St. Patrick's Church in Meenaweel, Crowley, this Friday at 2 p.m. That's where Donegal will say goodbye. And somewhere in that church, the air will carry something, not quite silence, not quite sound, that feels very much like the space her voice used to fill. Rest in peace, Moya Brennan, Mariadne Breanain, May 4, 1952, April 13, 2026.